My name is Tan Kin Lian. I want to talk about foreign workers working in Singapore. They belong to three categories: work permit holders, S-Pass and E-Pass. The work permit holders are for certain levels of jobs, certain types of jobs at the lower level, for example, in the construction or shipyard industries. The employer can apply for work permit to bring in foreign workers, and the employer has to pay a monthly fee, a monthly levy for each worker, a few $100s a month. The S-Pass belong to another level of foreign workers. They are paid higher than the work permit holders. The employer also has to apply for S-Pass, and in this category, the government introduces certain ratio. You are allowed to employ so many S-Pass in proportion to the number of locals that you employ. The S-Pass, the employer has to also pay a monthly levy for the S-Pass. So for the work permit and the S-Pass holders, there is a monthly levy and there is some form of control. In the case of E-Pass, employment pass, which are supposed to be for the higher level, I'm not clear what kind of control are being implemented. I think it is possibly just a salary must be at above a certain level. Now, strangely, there is no levy for E-Pass. I'm told that some employers will overstate the salary of the E-Pass holders by making sure that they are above the minimum, above the threshold required by the government, and in practice, they will actually pay less to the E-Pass holder, pay a lower salary to the E-Pass holder. For example, by charging them for accommodation or for other services that required by the worker, by the worker. So there could be large numbers of E-Pass holders being employed by companies at salaries that are actually below the threshold required by the government. And I suspect that there is not effective control over these applicants. Now, I want to also then say how do other countries handle their foreign workers? I have spoken to someone from who has migrated to Canada, and I think the same arrangement applies to Australia. My friend said he has to apply for a visa to live and work in Canada, and he has to provide documentary evidence of his qualification and experience, and Canada will grant the visa only if that occupation, that skill are needed by the country. And after he gets his permit to migrate, to live and work in Canada, he then look for a job. And then because there is demand for his skill, he looks for a job in the same way as a local would have looked for the job. So this is how Canada handle their foreign workers. I think Australia also do the same. They will invite applicants from overseas who have certain skills that are needed in Australia, and after being granted entry, the foreign worker will apply for jobs in the same way as a local. Now, in the case of Singapore, the process is different because the employer look for the potential candidate, then apply to the government for a pass. for foreign workers pass. So that Singapore is different. I just learned about America. In America, every year they invite people who are interested to live and work in America to apply for a green card. And because there are so many people interested to work in America, that was in past years. I don't know whether it's the same now. The number of applicants will be more than the number of people they want to take in. So they will do a random selection. It's like a lottery. So if there are X numbers of green card holders and more applicants, through the lottery, they will select who are the people granted the green card every year. So this is a system in America. I think the Singapore system is not working well, and is causing quite a bit of problem for the locals because of, especially for the e-pass, where there is not proper control over the number issue. I want to explain that this is the situation, and I hope that you can correct me if I'm wrong. And if you agree with me, do reinforce my message and send this to other people. Thank you for listening.
Everybody is talking about the REIT-out bungalows. So many MPs going to ask questions in the next parliamentary sitting. How come no MPs are asking what I call the shocking job statistics in Singapore today? Last year, we had record jobs growth, 200,000. 88.5% of the job growth went to foreigners. And so the remaining 11.5% includes PRs. So you add the PRs to the foreigners, you're looking at 90% of the record job growth last year went to non-Singaporeans. An estimated 52.3% of the total workforce, excluding migrant domestic workers, are non-native Singaporeans. What I mean by non-native Singaporeans? Foreigners, PRs, and new citizens. Why is the government so afraid to break down the job statistics for us? How many are PRs? How many are foreigners? We know they do give the breakdown. How many are new citizens? Why is the government so scared of being transparent? And so you say, what's the problem? If most of the jobs went to non-Singaporeans, and most of the jobs are being held by non-native Singaporeans, what is the problem? The problem is, if you look at the income statistics in the last 21 years, in 6 of the 8 occupational groups by classification, 6 of the 8, almost 50% of the total workforce has hardly had any real increase in pay in the last 21 years. And I repeat, hardly any real increase in pay in the last 21 years. If you are admin assistant and you're earning 1,500 plus 21 years ago, today the minimum starting salary for admin assistant is $1,500 under the occupational wages formula today. So can you imagine? 21 years you had no pay increase. Every year you're earning less money. So my dear Singaporeans, you know what to do when the next election comes. Thank you.
My dear Singaporeans, do we need foreign labor? The answer is yes. But why do we need them? How should we manage them? How many of them are enough for us as a small country? And how do we dispute them? And what type of labor, foreign laborers, do we need? These are all the fundamental questions that we have to set it straight. The root of the problems is we are short of labor. And it started off with PAP's long forgotten policy way back in the 1970s when I was born. The 2 is enough policies that restricted birth, penalized people who are giving more babies, having more babies, is a root cause of what we are facing right now. Because of that policy, PAP's policy, mind you, we have a rapidly aging population right now. And due to this aging population, taking my generation as a gauge, within 15 years, less than 15 years, we will feel the impact of a high proportion of Singaporeans who will be reaching the retirement age. 25 to 30% of us could be in the retirement age scenario. And with that, there will be a constraint on labor as well as tax revenue. That is why we need to build it up with foreign laborers. However, PAP made another mistake on top of this because they mismanaged the whole foreign labor policy. We will have a shortage of about 20% right now. In the future, about 25%. And that will become about less than 1 million people in the labor force. However, do you know that 40% of our labor force are actually foreigners right now? And that actually makes up to nearly 1 million, over 1 million. In fact, we have around 2 million people, foreigners, in Singapore right now. We have 3.7 million citizens, while our total population is coming all the way up to 6 million people. And that means that we have 2 million, over 2 million people are foreigners. And most of them, right, more than 70% of them are actually working in Singapore. So why do we need so many of them when our shortage of labor is only 20% of our citizenship? 20% is about 600,000 only. That is number one. PAPs always have this narrative. If we do not have foreign laborers, right, who is going to build HDB flats for us, to do the cleaning works, clear our rubbish? Yes, no doubt, Singaporeans do not want to do all this job. We need them. However, if we need them so much, why did the PAP government impose such a high levy, workers' levy, on these foreign laborers? Up to $1,200 max for all these foreign laborers who are doing all this low-skill job, which is necessary for our economy, for our society to work. But on the other hand, for those jobs that Singaporeans would like to do, in finance especially, hardly any levies have been imposed on the employment pass holders. Even for the special pass, it can be as low as $50 for the workers' levy. Does it mean that the PAP's government actually allows more foreign labor to compete with us, with our youngsters in these finance jobs? So the whole policy is actually messed up. For jobs, for vacancies that we need to fill up, the PAP government actually imposed high levy. But for those jobs that Singaporeans want to do, they allow foreign labor to come in cheap and to steal our lunch. And it's for you to think whether such policy actually makes sense. If you do not think that it makes sense, you have the power to change it in the coming election. Thank you.
My fellow Singaporeans, very good evening. You know, as I continue to speak to Singaporeans from all walks of life, it is clear to me that besides the excruciating cost of living pressures and the incredible unaffordability of property, I would say, the third worry Singaporeans have is over jobs. Singaporeans do not feel that they have security for jobs. And who can blame them when in the last quarter, Q2 of 2023, 25,500 new jobs were created for foreigners. But if you're a local, that means if you're a Singaporean or PR, jobs for you shrank by 1,500. And unemployment for Singaporeans rose by 25,400 in the same quarter. How can you feel secure? And, you know, when I travel about Singapore, I see for myself, I mean in the MRT, easily 40 to 50% of the commuters are foreigners. And of course they are here to work. So, my friends, you may ask me, what then is the solution? You know, I am not concerned about the nitty-gritties of policies, okay? I feel that we must get the big picture right. And you know what I would do if I were the government? I would ensure that there is priority for jobs for Singaporeans. Yeah. Right now, the government may have a plethora of policies. It may put this measure in place, that measure in place, you know, but what is lacking is total commitment by the government to making sure that unless there is no qualified Singaporean who's willing to do the job, no foreigner can be employed to do that work. This is the extent I will go to. It may sound extreme to you, but to me, that is the bargain. That is the social contract Singaporeans are entitled to. It is not just the government saying, oh, what are your obligations as a citizen? For example, if you're a male, you have to bear arms to defend the country, which, by the way, a new citizen above 30 doesn't have. All right? But in return for that obligation, Singaporeans are entitled to tell their government, you owe me something too. In return for me agreeing to defend my country, you owe me, you the government owe me a duty and an obligation to prioritize me for good paying jobs. Yeah? And you know, in all of this, as a government, I would refuse to allow citizenry to be held hostage by the commercial calculations of business. I refuse to do that. You know, right now, many employers prefer to employ foreigners. Why? Because it's much cheaper to do that. They don't have to pay CPF contributions. You know, Singaporeans, especially men, have reservist obligations. They have to pay CPF contributions. So, my friends, we must find a way to equalize the playing field for Singaporeans, especially the men. So, for me, number one, priority for jobs for Singaporeans. And I will make that extreme. And number two, I will implement a minimum wage. None of this progressive wage model rubbish that the PAP have come up with. I will make sure that whether you are a foreigner or a local Singaporean, there is a minimum wage in place. so that that Singapore employer will not find it so much cheaper to go and employ a foreigner. Everyone starts off with the same, all right? The starting point is the same, okay? I think with these two measures in place, the playing field would be leveled. Maybe not wholly, but to a large extent for Singaporeans. And we must do something, my friends. We cannot allow this situation to carry on. Already now, I believe, there are more foreign-born workers in Singapore than local Singaporeans. And if we don't address this, I think the future is very bleak for Singapore workers. Thank you.
Now the new Prime Minister, Mr. Goh Chok Tong, came in 1984 and confidently said we will have a Swiss standard of living by 1999. I remember this very vividly because I was reading the papers and me and my friends were talking about this. But by 1985, we were hit with a recession, as foreign investors couldn't tahan the new policies because they couldn't pay high salaries to our locals. And now we were in a dilemma because of lack of planning or lack of vision or hindsight. See, if you force foreigners with policies, easy lah, they pack up and ciao. The over-reliance on foreign investments prove to be unstable in a long run. Now remember this statement, because we might experience this again in the near future. With foreign investors leaving for greener pastures, the government abandoned the second industrial revolution and took on another policy, low-wage export production from 1985 to 1990. This was the beginning of our troubles. This resulted in freezing of wages, pay all, just stay, and cutting down on employer CPF contribution. Cut down on their CPF contribution, their cost goes down. See, we developed too fast, thus exceeding the local productivity and investment. You couldn't keep up. Okay, local productivity and investment expectations. So some will see it as great what the government wanted to do good, but this situation required the cutbacks. Okay, but again, that's why I always say when people ask me, hey, what's a mark of a good or great leader? I always say vision and good hindsight and good planning. Our leaders had good intentions but lacked crucial leadership skills. Now comes the knife to our back. You guys better sit down for this one because this is a shocker. Biggest planned screw up by the PAP was in the 1990s. They allowed a massive number of semi-skilled and unskilled labor coming into Singapore. Companies operating in Singapore started bringing in overseas workers to work for them because they couldn't pay the locals who were asking for higher pay. And the ministers did not monitor this or stop this. With a new army of cheap labor available from foreign lands, what happens to Singaporeans in the labor market? They are now competing with foreign workers willing to take on a lower pay. So Singaporeans needed to take on lower paying jobs just to be employed to put food on the table. Now you know where the big trouble started for us. And it has not ended till today. Between 1990 and 2020, a massive number of semi-skilled and unskilled labor was let into Singapore. And this is the shocker, almost 1 million plus approximately. Why did our government not pay attention to this cheap labor walking into Singapore? Didn't they know this will hit the bellies of us working class? So business took to low wages and long hours, because there were availability of workers willing to work such conditions. Who do we blame? The companies, the foreigners, or the policies that led them into our country in the first place? Now we have foreigners who can thrive. No, they do well, be successful in these conditions. But our locals were getting poorer as they could not cope with the low wage but a high cost of living. Whose fault? See, if this low cost labor were not available in Singapore, say the governments did not allow these workers to come in, local business would not have any choice but forced to invest more into technology. And the government could have invested more capital into technology. It would have worked for us. Productivity would have still risen much slower, but by now we could have got out of the storm. A lot of other countries have also weathered these storms. So our Asian brothers have more domestic capitalists than us. That means they have more richer people because they focus on local labor to slowly but surely grow their economy. So people thrive, they became richer, they had money.